Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. It's been a busy week, lots to get through, and to dissect it all, we've got Logan,
G'day, everybody.
and we've also got Brad.
Hello, everyone.
We've had a few on-field results that bear mentioning and discussing, but we'll probably start with the biggest news and the news that's kind of broken over the last couple of days, and that's the sacking of Mike Phelan. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion and speculation about who's coming in to replace him, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I wanted to start by just discussing that actual sacking and what the ramifications for that are and what it kind of means for the team. I'll start with you, Brad. I guess we were discussing in the last podcast that there was something sort of amiss at the club and something needed to change if we were in any hope of staying up. Do you think this is it?
Well, I'd like to hope it is, if anything, just for the fact that we're going to have a different look and different perspective on things. We know that where Phelan's let himself down is his ability or inability to react at the wrong time. So he's changed the formations at the wrong time. He's brought players on at the wrong time, and we all know that in a season that it might come down literally to 5 or 6 points. There's been a couple of games where you could almost say the fault does bear with him, or at least who he's picked for certain games. But I suppose the excitement is all about possibly what, if it is Silva, what players he may be able to attract that Phelan couldn't.
Silva, Marco Silva is the name in the frame to take over. Logan, do you think stylistically Phelan was letting the team down? Do you think? We were starting to show in that 3-5-2 formation that we could play decent football. We just couldn't string it together for a whole game.
Yeah, I think we've got to be very careful with the discredit that we kind of throw Phelan's way, kind of knowing with all the commotion and unease that seems to be circulating around the club at the moment. I've read various reports about kind of the toxic nature, and he was almost thrown into a job that was he was up against it from the start and didn't really have all that much to work with. Now, I'm not really of that persuasion where I thought that he was there to do the impossible. But if you do cast our minds back to a few short months ago, when we picked up the first two victories against Leicester and Swansea, we were very quick to sing Phelan's praise.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's all been downhill since then, but there were some positive signs in a difficult period that there was a lot of promise to what Mike Phelan had to offer, and I thought that he did an admirable job in parts. But I think it probably just comes down to the point now, as Brad mentioned, is we weren't accruing the points that we needed, and it will come down to a game of inches towards the end, and there's definitely some results that we can kind of look back on and realise just how key those results were, and whether that will be the difference, whether we stay up or go down. Because it is of such a nature, something kind of needed to be done, and this seems like the strong option, the choice that City have decided to go with.
Statistically, it doesn't read great for Phelan that he spent more time in charge as caretaker than as permanent manager, and I think he's also become our shortest ever permanent manager in the process, which won't read great for him. But as you say, Logan, he did have a great start to his time at the club as the caretaker manager. We had that fantastic win over Leicester, and let's not forget that's the first time ever that the champions have lost on the opening day, so it's a fantastic result from him in that sense. And the way that he had us set up at the start, it wasn't a fluke. He had us set up quite well. I wonder if he did keep up that level of research and that level of analysis week by week, because he seemed to have that set up at the start to really give us that extra edge against teams where we really knew how they set up and how they played.
I think it was more along the lines, just as these new players have come in, he's almost tried to put his stamp on the squad and keep putting it on even when it wasn't quite working. But look, hats off to the guy. He was on a hiding to nothing, really. Even if we got promoted and new owners come in, there was every chance that they might have... Sorry, not promoted, if we stayed up, there's every chance a new owner would have come in and replaced him anyway. So I do feel for the bloke.
We'll move on then and talk about the actual results from the last two games, which I guess sort of spelled the end for Phelan in some sense of the word. We had our first game of the year on New Year's Eve, our time, so actually I guess last game of 2016, against Everton, where we took the lead twice in quite compelling football. Dawson scoring the first goal with a pretty tidy finish, and then Snodgrass with a fantastic free kick, which moments before it had another free kick that hit the frame. So we looked good money for the win in that one, as I think you had a bit of money on that game, Brad. But unfortunately, unfortunately let the lead slip twice, the first with a pretty calamitous own goal. So I'll get your thoughts on that one first, Logan.
Yeah, it was a game that seemed to kind of ebb and flow. We started very promisingly, and obviously when we got the first goal, you kind of always have that high sense of optimism when City take the lead, because traditionally in the past we've always been pretty good from the front. And so when we took the lead, you knew that they'd turned up, and you knew that we were going to kind of give Everton everything that we had. And obviously that the keeping error on half time from Marshall was kind of just exactly what we couldn't afford, and almost that rude was an opportunity that we'll continue to rue for quite some time, I'm suggesting. And then obviously the Snodgrass free kick. Well, I think when he took the first one, we thought, that was a huge effort, but just our luck. And then when he stepped up and put the second one in, it almost defied belief. And we found ourselves in the lead again. But even when we led it 2-1, I still just had this feeling that Everton weren't done and dusted yet, because of the way the game just kept shifting. So, look, it was a promising effort, and it was a very, very good game to watch, particularly if you're a neutral fan. But yeah, there was definitely 3 points that I feel that we really needed to walk away with.
And Snodgrass basically turned from hero to villain in the way that we coughed up that equaliser with some pretty lazy defending for that cross in from Baines, I think it was. Brad, we'll obviously talk about the West Brom game in a second, but there's a few pretty easy goals that we've coughed up, particularly from crosses. In this case, especially with the Everton goal, do you put more blame at the feet of Snodgrass for not defending better against that cross, or do you look at Davies and Dawson for not organising the defence in the box and actually cutting out that header a bit better?
Look, they're all accountable, I think, but in the end, the buck needs to stop probably with Davies and Dawson. But look, it probably gets back to as well, without Marshall bashing here, I believe one of the things that gets overlooked a lot is I think technically Marshall is a good keeper, and he wouldn't have been bought if he wasn't. But there just seems to be a slight lack of what I call it creepy coordination going on at corners, which has been there for about a month or so, where, I don't know whether it's the three of them, Davies, Dawson and Marshall, that actually need to be doing more. But, I don't know about anyone else's experiences, but mine is you generally got a keeper or a central defender yelling and screaming at everyone on a corner. And if you look back at the highlights of that, all three of them didn't really sort of look like they were on top of it. And look, without sort of jumping the Snodgrass's defence or anything, I think if he had eyes in the back of his head, he would have picked him up, and he didn't.
So obviously Snodgrass had a great game against Everton with that free kick goal. Logan, which other players also stood out for you as having good games?
I thought Livermore was pretty impressive, and you've obviously mentioned the set piece goal. I thought that Dawson and Davies were quite good across the kind of the flow of the game, and just with the exception of letting that second goal slip, which could be argued where you kind of shift the blame to. But I thought those two were pretty handy.
And how about you, Brad?
Look, I'd agree. I thought Livermore was really good, and I think probably to sort of add to Logan's point there, it may even be the fact that Davies sort of naturally assumes that Dawson's onto it, and Dawson naturally, and sometimes I wonder whether with Dawson there, whether they both sort of feel like, oh yeah, he's going to do it, or not intentionally, but just subconsciously, whether that happens. But look, I think Livermore's been really solid, and I've been impressed with him reasonably all year. Different positions at different times, but I think he showed that he is a Premier League player, not a Championship player.
And then I guess, sorry, the final point I was going to mention for this game, which is a pretty big talking point, I suppose, was Robertson getting dropped to the bench. Do we read anything into that, or is it merely a case of him getting rested for the West Brom game, which came just after? Oh, sorry, I'm confusing myself. I think was Robertson rested for the West Brom game or the Everton game?
West Brom.
West Brom. Okay, well then maybe that's a good segue into the West Brom game then. So, looking at the West Brom game then, I guess a big talking point out of that was the lineup, and Robertson was obviously dropped to the bench for that one with Klukas coming in at left wing back. Did you guys read anything into that, or do you think it was just a case of a couple of games in a couple of days?
Yeah, I think it's probably more the case. A couple of games in a couple of days. And I guess with the way that the Big Harry played against Everton, getting forward, he would have fancied himself to slot into the wing back role.
And Brad, I guess we've sort of already touched on those set piece goals costing us in previous games, and I guess again in the West Brom game with those 2 goals just after half time. But we were obviously looking good money for it in the first half. What do you reckon? What was the cause for the collapse in the second half?
Look, I'm not sure. It could have been in part the fact that maybe us going ahead just kicked them into gear a bit. I still think, early on, obviously, we were easily the better side, and I think West Brom had one of those nights that they played average at best and managed to get away with it. But probably the only thing that sort of showed to me a little bit of a light, we just seemed to sort of take a little step back, and not necessarily in the park, but more on the space that we gave them. In that first 25 minutes or so, we were giving them hardly any time on the ball. We weren't giving them much space to move into. Our passing was very good, and I can't even remember when they had. I think they got a shot off early, but I can't even remember when they got their second shot anywhere near target. But it just seemed like after about a half hour or so, we were just giving them a bit more space, whether that's energy or formation or whatever it seemed to be, I don't know. But look, part of it, I think, as well, is one thing that I've admired Robertson for since we first got him at the club is even late in games, he manages to get right in behind defences. And it's a big job from where he's playing on the park to be doing that in the last 20 minutes of a game. And I just think that's probably the biggest difference with him and Klukas. Klukas is a competent player, but it could have been part of that attacking mindset that we may have needed.
And Logan, you were touching on Livermore with the Everton game, but it was obviously Livermore's great pass that sort of split West Brom apart for Elmo to play that cross in for Snodgrass. And Livermore does just seem to be improving game on game. He started the season as a defender, so that might have impacted his form in midfield once he moved back there, but he certainly seems to have found his feet again.
Yeah, certainly. I think he just, what you're going to get with Livermore. He seems to be that kind of solid foundation in the side every single week. He's Mr. Reliable, if you will. So, it's positive to see him contributing, particularly, like you said, with mentioning that pass. If you've got probably any criticisms of Livermore's game, it is that kind of that clinical last pass. I don't think that he's probably looked upon as a huge assist kind of giver. And so, to see balls like that slipping through, that can only be a great thing for his confidence.
In the first half, we were obviously quite on top and ended up slipping away in the game and losing at 3-1. But positives to take from this game, I suppose. Any players that stood out particularly for you, Brad?
Look, probably nothing that we sort of didn't already know. I think Livermore proved again that he's certainly in our better group of players. Probably, I think, playing Klukas at left back is not ideal. I certainly don't think he did anything drastically wrong or cost us the game, but and I know he was there to obviously give Robertson a break. We guessed, but we saw him in that first month of the Premier League and one or two times against West Ham when he was flowing through the middle of the park, that when he's on the ball, we look a lot more dangerous sitting in front of that back three. And probably just thinking back to where the game swung, one of the West Brom players, I can't remember who it was, got injured in that sort of half-hour mark, and they went to a back three. So they squeezed that space out that we had across the midfield, and that's probably where Clucas has been really good, holding that ball in the midfield. So no one sort of stood out to me, but I think it stood out to me how much we did miss Robertson and his pace down the left.
Logan, without trying to bring up the Marshall debate too much, after that Everton game with that howler at halftime, do you think Yak would be scratching his head a little bit that he didn't even just get get a look in for one game just to sort of shake Marshall up a little bit? I just feel like after that sort of howler, it's sort of almost the time when you bring someone else in to just freshen things up a little bit.
Yeah, the concerning thing for me was not actually the howler on its own, but there was many times in the first half in that Everton game where we saw a couple of shots fizz past the post, and Marshall didn't even look to be anywhere kind of in the vicinity. He'd planted his feet a few times and seemingly just didn't have the urgency to get across and even make it kind of look like a save. Now, that was the sign that they actually did mention that in the commentary. At times that Marshall looked like he was kind of off the pace. Then to kind of play devil's advocate, he did make that cracking save straight after half-time where we put that ball onto the crossbar, which no doubt would have restored his own confidence. So, look, after the first half at Everton, I thought that at West Brom we were certainly going to see the axe return. And it obviously wasn't to be. So I would certainly be scratching my head if I was Eldon Jukovic right now, wondering why I'm not playing first-team football.
And I think confidence is the word there that you've touched on. A lot of people on Twitter, and I'll be the first to admit that I've been quite vocal about Jakovic's absence from the team. A lot of people have sort of cited the fact that by leaving Marshall in the team, it's helping his confidence in some way, that by not dropping him, that dropping him would somehow harm his confidence, which I always find quite interesting because I almost feel like a player who's playing and having 4 or 5 goals knocked in past him most weeks would actually be doing worse things for his confidence than having a break and having a breather in the stands. But look, everyone's entitled to their views on it. It's obviously quite a controversial one that's going to split a lot of the fans. But we'll move on then, and we'll talk about now the potential manager that's coming into the club, and it hasn't been announced by the club yet, or it might have been by the time this podcast goes to air, but the name on everyone's lips seems to be Marco Silva. Brad, you mentioned him a bit earlier. He comes with quite a pedigree, but I have to admit, he's not one that I'd heard of before yesterday, so I had to do a bit of digging about it. I'll start with you, Logan. I've done a bit of digging, so I'll go into his background for everyone listening in, but I'll start with you, Logan, just on your thoughts on his potential appointment and your sort of reaction to that news.
Yeah, certainly. So I agree. It was an interesting one as far as someone who's probably not as well known to City. The thing that kind of sparked my reaction and I found the most alarming was how quickly, as you said, if this deal does come to fruition, as we all kind of are beginning to expect that it will, it's how quickly the turnaround was from Phelan sacking to the kind of foreseen appointment of Silva if it does go ahead. It talks about how he's bringing his old backroom staff with him to some degree, and you also mentioned off air earlier about the striking coach coming. And that to me kind of sends alarm bells to think, well, something was obviously going in. There was negotiations going on kind of off the table before Phelan was to get sacked. So it obviously seems like a fairly premeditated swoop. And obviously I feel that it wouldn't be one that would have happened if they didn't strongly believe in who Silva is as a manager.
Brad, listening to that, I guess in some ways it's concerning perhaps, but in other ways perhaps it's reassuring that the Allams seem to have finally done something right in terms of timing, that they've actually gone out, they've locked in an appointment, and then they've made the sacking rather than sacking Phelan and then running around with that, like they've had their heads chopped off for 2 weeks trying to find a replacement in all that time, kind of losing time in the window to do anything about it.
Yeah, I think, not being fair, I can't give the Allams any credit for anything. I don't know, it's just in my DNA now. But I think look, realistically, this could be a scenario that could have occurred. I actually think that they were probably in an advanced position with Silva when Bruce left, when they were trying to replace Bruce in the first place, and for whatever reason at that time, maybe the new owners or no new owners or whatever scared Silva away. And then I think because of what's been going on in recent times, maybe even Silva's agent contacted the club. I can't give the Allams credit for running around for the last 6 or 7 weeks and recruiting what could be at least close to world-class manager.
That is a good point, because there have been links, because obviously everyone's a bit confused about where this link's come from to Marco Silva because of the fact that the Allams self-admittedly don't know a whole lot about football and had to have somebody recommend Steve Bruce to them, let alone an international manager. So there were a lot of confused tweets flying around late yesterday, and I think the logical connection has emerged that Jorge Mendes, who's the super agent of Jose Mourinho and Pogba, is he Pogba's agent? He's Ronaldo's agent, etc. Has been helping to negotiate with Chinese groups looking for takeovers in England, and I think he, for instance, first touted Silva to Wolverhampton when they were taken over by the Chinese, and Silva came very close to being the manager there. And so I think with the Allams being in contact with various groups looking at taking over the club, they've inevitably run into Mendes, who has then recommended Silva. It's going to be interesting if we ever find out what the time frame is, whether he was being interviewed in the summer and has only just come in now for whatever reason. But yeah, he's been out of work for about 6 months after leaving Olympiacos. He cited personal reasons, but it seems like it was basically him saying, well, I've done my bit at Olympiacos, I've had my time there, but he's looking for bigger and better things and has always sort of had his eye on coming to England. But he's got an interesting pedigree about him, and on first look you look at it and you say, okay, well, he's got a good winning record, but he's been at Sporting Lisbon, he's been at Olympiacos. They're pretty big fish in small ponds. They're going to have big winning records naturally. But it's his work with S02E15, if I'm pronouncing that right, where he started off as a player, became the director of football, and then became manager, where he got them promoted from the second division. He took them to 5th in the Portuguese league, which, if we're going to say that Sporting Lisbon's a big fish, it stands to reason that getting S02E15 to 5th is actually quite good. Took them into the Europa League and managed to get them to 4th the following season before being poached by Sporting. So it bodes quite well that he's able to manage these smaller clubs, as he's done in that case, and actually got them performing pretty well. So it looks like he's got his Champions League experience, where he's knocked off Arsenal a couple of times as Olympiacos boss. He's got his smaller club experience with S02E15. And he hasn't been sacked for poor results, which I also really liked. He's been sacked for not wearing a suit at a game, which I've always found one of the funnier reasons to be sacked as a manager. Though that sounds like that was the owners just looking for an excuse to bring in their own man. And then he left Olympiacos of his own volition. So it seems to bode well that he hasn't been sacked for poor results anywhere. He seems to have a good winning record wherever he goes. He's young, he's enthusiastic, he has new ideas, and I think that's what we need. We just need fresh ideas and anything. I mean, I think under Phelan we were all just resigned to relegation, and now there's that slim sliver of hope. So, Logan, what do you make of Silva?
Yeah, with all those things that you've mentioned, I think that if anything, the managerial change at this time, we obviously don't have all too much to celebrate going into the new year, obviously right at the bottom of the pile. I think it can provide a new sense of optimism around the club to a degree, as with any managerial change would hopefully do. And based on his track record, and particularly, as you said, not just managing the bigger clubs, but being able to kind of do it with a smaller club as well. That obviously seems to bode quite well with the model of what City require at the moment, if they are indeed to stay up. So I think it's a promising thing.
And he'd obviously be only our second ever non-British manager after Jan Molby, who didn't have too good a spell with the club, and I think few people have been quick to point that out. But Brad, what's your take on appointing a foreign manager? It's not something we've done too often. Do you think it matters that he's foreign? Do you think it might take him a while to settle into the league? Could that be an issue, or how do you see it?
Well, I mean, I think, look, the fact he's foreign might be an issue the same. I think for us, if we go back to previous relegations and even not just at Hull but other clubs, you can see that they try to do sort of a stopgap with the manager to try and stop the bleeding. And probably the only thing that I can see here is we know that as a side, we haven't had the results, but our form's been pretty good in, say, 4 out of the last 5 matches. It may just need that sprinkle of, I don't know, whatever it may be, arrogance or enthusiasm or refreshment or something that comes into that camp to put everyone on notice as a new manager in town. Like surely Marshall's quaking in his boots as to whether or not he's going to retain. And that probably, as a supporter, that's probably the only encouraging thing is there's been that much debate on Marshall. Well, we're now going to have a second manager have a look at it. And surely they're both not going to get it wrong.
Yeah, and you talk about...
They're both going to have pretty good opinions on it.
You talk about arrogance there, and he has been compared to the successor to Jose Mourinho, and I think Mourinho himself has a pretty good relationship with Silva. Looking at his games in the Champions League, I think he commented on the Olympiacos and Arsenal game, hoping that Silva would get the win, and I'm sure that wasn't just because it was against Wenger. But he seems to be compared to Mourinho a little bit, and I'm sure he'll bring something new and a bit of excitement to the club. So hopefully it can work out and be a bit promising.
Well, it's certainly going to look like a comparison to Ian Dowie, is it? So that's good.
Yeah. Well, that's always when people say, well, you know, foreign managers don't work out. You just have to say, well, Ian Dowie didn't work out either. So a little bit. If it is going to be Silva, his first game will be against Swansea in the FA Cup, which might be an interesting one for him to start off with, because there are boycotts planned by both sets of supporters, both having issues with their ownership. And from what I've heard, there's about 2,000 tickets that have been sold. Another 2,500 of corporate fans might be there, and obviously there's still a few days until the game, so it might get up to about 6,000 or 7,000. But in any case, single-digit crowd, 4-digit crowd if you want to get technical, isn't going to be great for Silva, or I guess for the national press when looking at this game. But what do you guys make of that? Do you think it's a worthy cause to sort of stage this boycott and show the Allams just what could happen if we keep tumbling down the leagues and really make a stand? Logan, I'll get your thoughts.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it somewhat even polarises myself. I think on one hand, it probably is long overdue in the sense that although the Allams would have to be living under a rock if they could see that the fans aren't disgruntled at the moment. But in saying that, obviously they should have known that for quite some time, and it doesn't seem to have changed anything on the way they operate. So I certainly think that there is merit in a boycott. It just would seem to me that if Silva is in fact appointed and he does come in with fresh ideas, and there is kind of a spark or a spring in the step to the current playing group, when they're somewhat on notice fighting for spots again and all the rest of it, to play a third round cup tie in front of next to no one, I think that could be relatively damaging to the kind of morale for the players.
Brad, what are your thoughts on the potential protests and also on the game in general?
I think I'm going to be a real pain in the bum as well and say that I'm like Logan. I'm not sure either way, and maybe it's because we're so far away we don't necessarily sit right in it to decide whether or not we would boycott or not. We don't have to make a decision. I suppose that helps. But I often find that with these things, as long as everyone is really on board, it's worth doing. And I've seen a lot of commentary both ways on this one that makes me think, you know what, if you had to do a straw poll, probably 6 out of 10 would boycott. And I wonder whether that's actually enough of a message. You guys might remember we had that situation in Australia at the end of 2015 when we had an Australian League matches being boycotted because of certain issues, and that was a pretty serious boycott. There was no one there besides corporates. So the message got across pretty quick. In this case, if the Allams actually attend the game, whether it would make much difference to them, it obviously adds more exposure, but we've been national press before. Nothing's going to change. I thought the billboard campaign that the Supporters Trust did was fantastic and really resonated with a lot more people. But in the end, I don't think they're going to listen either way. They're still going to do their thing. They've got a pretty serious agenda, and that's the way it's going to remain. But as far as the cup goes, I think we'll pants them. I think we'll give Swansea a flogging, and I think for once we'll score multiple goals without Snodgrass actually needing to score one. I actually have a feeling that this will be a real release game. Players will really feel like they can play, and we know this year when we've actually said, you know what, we're better than this, we can play. We're good. Swansea will be coming to Hull thinking, great, we've got to go to Hull. It'll be cold. Our supporters aren't coming. Manager's gone. Okay.
Hey, it's a city of culture. Where else would they rather be?
Hey, I'm talking it down as if I'm a Swansea.
I know. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I think it's going to be one of those games where it has not a lot in it for them other than maybe their own prove to their new manager. But it's one thing I do actually feel confident about. Whether we stay up or down, I don't know. But at least I'm seeing enough in the squad there to think, do you know what? We could pinch the points here. Whereas the last time we got relegated, we really were no chance to pinch the points. We were getting worse and worse, and our form was getting worse and worse. Even to the point where, you look at that FA Cup side that we put out for the final, bless him, we're playing Matty Fryatt up front on his own. We just didn't have what I think is an elite group. Whereas this time, with a new manager coming in as well, there should be no excuses to have a wide-ranging squad to get the job done.
It's very interesting. I mean, you look at West Brom sitting in 8th, I think they are, or 9th, and Everton are also up there in the top half, and we played better than them for the majorities of each game. So as much as people want to say that we're not a side that looks like it should be in the Premier League, I think that's people looking perhaps at the results, or looking at patches of the games where we are conceding goals, admittedly. But for large patches of the games, we're looking quite good, and it's just whether we can string whole games together, and hopefully Silva can get us doing that. Logan, do you think it's worth progressing in the FA Cup? I mean, we've got the League Cup semi-final doubleheader coming up, which we'll also discuss, but there's this sort of pile-up of games happening, and do you think it's perhaps getting to that point where it's almost worth just playing the kids?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. I think that Brad is correct. I think that if we were to turn up and play our full squad, I think we would do away with Swansea quite comfortably. But yeah, I'm probably more of that persuasion that I don't think that an FA Cup run heading in towards the back end of this well and truly large relegation fight we are in and will be in. I'm tipping right up until the final week. I think that having an extra couple of games to add to the list isn't going to do us any good. So I wouldn't be too upset to see us bomb out of the cup early.
I guess then moving on to transfers in general, and we'll finish off talking about the League Cup games that are coming up as well, but we'll talk transfers briefly because the club put out a statement, or more specifically EHAB put out a statement, which seems to be a biannual event, or at least it just occurs around the changing of managers, to discuss the fact that Phelan has been let go. And he mentioned in that, interestingly, that he saw the squad as being good enough to keep us up as long as we made about 2 or 3 additions to it, which personally when I read that I thought was probably understating it just a little bit, because I think you could put 2 new right backs in just to give us a bit of depth at right back, and you'd still need another couple of players. I mean, we need depth at both fullbacks really, and then a couple of strikers as well. But in terms of transfers, I'll start with you, Logan, because I know we talked about this in the summer in terms of the number of signings we were going to make, but how many signings do you think we need to make to stay up, and in what areas?
Yeah, okay. I think it's probably 3 or 4. I think, like you said, we're certainly deficient in the wing back roles. I think we're probably okay in the central defence department, and I would love. I mean, we could always do with a new attacking striking option, particularly given the tardiness of whether Hernandez will even be. And how much of an impact he'll have coming back from the injury scrap. I think that we definitely need to strengthen the fullback roles and up top as well.
And how about you, Brad? Do you think 2 to 3 signings is enough, or do you think that we'd probably need to look for a few more than that?
Yeah, look, I think the core group of guys we've got fits. So definitely the right back side of things is an issue. And to some extent, if we need to play Klukas at left back, you could argue that left back's somewhat of an issue as well. Although I think we've got adequate reserve there, it doesn't seem to happen. We definitely need a striker, and it's not to say that Mbakani can't do it on his day, but we need options. Technically at the moment, I think our biggest problem is obviously at both ends of the park. I think we've got enough midfielders in the squad to hang our hat, a couple of overpaid ones, but we've got definitely even maybe 2 strikers. At the moment, we know when we've had when Diamande was suspended and then Mbakani was suspended, we're pretty much looking at who's next. Playing Henriksen in a makeshift sort of forward midfielder striker role is not going to work. We pretty much need more depth across the whole squad, and at the moment all we've got some depth in is central defenders and central midfielders.
Yeah, and especially with the African Cup of Nations, so El Mohammadi and Mbakani are away for pretty much the whole month. It's going to be interesting to see in that Swansea game who lines up at right back. I mean, I suppose when El Mohammadi was suspended, we had David Myler filling in there, and Brian Lenihan, who played that one game last season against Bolton, and hasn't really been cited since. I think he's recovering from an injury. The last time I checked in on him, but yeah, we're kind of at a shortage of fullbacks in that sense. So I think that's got to be the priority in the coming days, if not in the next week or so. But I suppose, at a bare minimum, if we were just going to bring in those 2 to 3 players that Ehab speaks of, it would basically have to be a very good right back who could basically become first choice, because even when El Mohammadi was here, he wasn't looking too convincing at right back. Perhaps at right wing back he's okay, but if we ever have to switch to 4 at the back, which I think Silva likes to do, I think he likes to play a 4-3-3. I think we definitely need a new right back, and then a quality striker. So you could probably squeeze by with maybe only 3 signings and get a right back in, an attacking mid perhaps, and a striker. But that would be certainly at the bare minimum, if that's the way we're gonna deal with the month. But I suppose we'll see. Of course, Silva could pull some strings and bring in a few freebies or loan signings from wherever, and all of a sudden we could look pretty good for very little money. So perhaps the Allams are hoping he'll be able to do that. We'll finish off then with a bit of positivity, I should say, optimism. We've got our Manchester United League Cup semi-final coming up. First leg is next Wednesday morning. I've put out some posters and pictures to sort of promote the event. Various pubs around Australia that are going to be showing the game. So hopefully we can get a bit of support out there, because this is probably the highlight of what's becoming a pretty lackluster season, but we'll hopefully have a bit of an upturn. The first leg's at Old Trafford. I'll start with you, Logan. What can we expect out of this game? It's away at Old Trafford where we don't really have a whole lot of success. Do we basically just have to hold on and hope for a draw?
I reckon it's one of those ones that we mentioned about before. I think that it's got the kind of the free hit mentality towards nobody really expects us to go to Old Trafford and be damaged, and if we're honest with ourselves, we probably don't expect to go there and do much. But I think that within the playing group, there'll be a real sense of relief that they can go there without really anything to lose. And I wouldn't be surprised to see us kind of pull some kind of result. If we could force a draw and take it back to the KCOM, you'd be very, very interested to see how far we could actually go. I'm not too worried about it. I think it's going to be a really good test, and I think regardless of the result, it'll be a good performance.
It's interesting. I've had a look at the fixtures for the two sides for the weekend after the game, because obviously we've both got FA Cup fixtures beforehand. But I think United play Liverpool, whereas we play Bournemouth. So there is some potential there that United might look at that first leg and say, oh, well, Ibra can have a bit of a rest, and maybe Pogba will get rotated, and various other players might not be in the side. So, as you say, there might be that possibility that we could take a free hit at it and actually get some sort of result. Brad, how are you viewing it? Do you see this sort of, as Logan says, as a free hit, or do you think it's sort of a real danger game that we've got to hold on so that we don't get blown away too quickly?
Yeah, look, probably a bit of both. I think the one thing that I was going to check with you guys is, does the away goal rule apply?
It's a good question. I think it might. but
I think it does.
I'm not too sure. If you keep
Not that
talking,
I'm
I'll
thinking
look it
it's
up.
going to be that close, but I do think probably the key thing is, even if it is a loss, just to be able to score that goal to get us on there, because we know that Man U would back themselves to score at the KC. So that goal's pretty important. So maybe like a 2-1 loss is something that you can then really have a crack at. But who knows? They've got a really tight schedule too. So, if they're going to play their stars, they might decide to see, I think they've got Liverpool a couple of days after or something. So they've got a pretty serious couple of fixtures coming up. The only thing I think in the FA Cup they've got a championship side, so that might be where they play their second string.
I think they have Reading. So Reading aren't travelling too badly themselves. So depending on their perspective and whether they want to progress in both cups, they may well have to play a half-decent side against Reading. But whether they rest players against us to then be able to play against Liverpool, not too sure. I've just had a look, and the away goals do count as doubles. So
good.
If we do score, it will mean a lot.
Yeah. And maybe the key is to start a bit of a GoFundMe page for Paul McShane to take a few players out a couple of days before, and on the basis that we'll sign him as our right back solution. So,
well, he'll be wanting to square up with Fellaini, won't he? After what Fellaini did to him.
Yeah, I hope so. So hopefully there's a lot of spite and they smash the pulp out of each other, and then get to us. But I think, look, realistically, it's one of the tougher games to play, whether it's a League Cup or not. But probably the only thing is there's still some vulnerability at Man U, and hopefully if we're on song and drilled and potentially still trying to greatly impress a new manager, we sneak away with a tight result, even if it's on the wrong side of. I think we're no chance if we don't score. And that's not to say, great, a 0-0 result's not great. It is, but I think that just that psychological. We went to Old Trafford and we managed to score. We can do it at home and have a crack at them. Is what could make all the difference.
I think football writers everywhere will be dreaming of City winning that two-legged tie and getting to the final, just so they can write the headline, "The silver lining to Hull's Premier League campaign." Logan, what are your thoughts on the score in this first leg? Any sense on the score prediction?
Yeah, I think it's going to be 1-1.
Okay.
I think Snodgrass will give us the goal.
Because if we can get a 1-1 result, I think that would set us up pretty well for that second leg, which would be the following week, I believe, or it might be 2 weeks after. There might be a Champions League week in between, but it's a big game nonetheless. It's going to be very exciting, and City does in recent years seem to rise to the occasion in cups. I can't think of too many occasions where we've looked really poor in a cup game, other than I suppose that first half against Sheffield United in the semi-final. But we've tended to do quite well in cups recently, so hopefully that's another case next Wednesday morning. But thank you both for coming on. It's been a pretty action-packed episode. We've had plenty of stuff to cover.
Yeah, not a problem.
And thank you everyone for listening in. Hopefully it's been an enjoyable listen. Hopefully you now know a little bit more about Marco Silva, if he is indeed to take over as Hull City manager. And until next time, come on City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
Going higher and higher. There's no turning back.